When purposeless procrastination strikes and you don't feel like doing something and you know you should, how do you get on with it? In this video, I want to give you my best 16 tips for how to conquer procrastination. Typical procrastinators need to know that getting on with it is not so bad after all. But if you're a frequent flyer with procrastination airways, then here are 16 tips for you to try out to get you off the plane. Tip number 1. Create a sense of discomfort. Embrace the discomfort of knowing that you should be doing it, you haven't done it, and you're not about to start. In your mind, ramp up all of the consequences of putting it off. Focus on what will go wrong, focus on the disappointment for yourself and for other people. Think about who you'll be letting down and what you'll be losing if you put this off. Tip number 2, focus on the future. The inverse of tip number 1 is to focus on how good you will feel, how proud you'll be, the outcomes you'll get when you've done it. If you think about it, tip number 1 is akin to setting a deadline and knowing there are consequences for missing the deadline. And tip number 2 is akin to setting a milestone and knowing you'll be able to celebrate when you hit that milestone. Hey, why not use both? Tip number 3 is baby steps. Thinking about the whole task can seem off-putting, but what is that first little step you can take to getting it done? The thing about taking a first step is A, it's easy to do, it doesn't require a lot, it's quick and it's straightforward. And the second thing is that having taken your baby step, you'll have a sense of momentum. You'll fall forward into the next step. So tip number 4 is to slice up the elephant. This huge task that is causing you to procrastinate because you don't want to take it on can be so much simpler if you slice it into thin slices, each one being a small and simple task. Having taken the baby step and done the first task, then the second task is equally small and equally simple. Our brains find it so much easier to deal with small tasks, so any big thing that you want to put off, split it into many, many small things. Tip number 5 is to create a first draft. What I mean by this is if it's too difficult to do properly and to do well, then set yourself the task of doing a first draft, of doing it initially to a relatively low and easy to attain standard, and then setting yourself the second task of polishing it up and getting it right. Tip number 6 is easiest things first. This is rather like baby steps, but instead of taking the first logical step, start with the easiest part of the task. Find something that you can do as easily as possible with as little mental friction as possible. That way, when you've got that done, you feel you've made progress, that pride will propel you onto the next step. And tip number 7, worst things first. There's an old saying which is that if you eat a frog the first thing in the morning, everything else will seem easy and pleasant. If you've got a really unpleasant thing to do, then do it first thing in the morning when you're fresh, when you've got maximum reserves of mental, physical, emotional and psychological energy. If you put it off to later in the day when your energy reserves are draining, it will get harder and harder. Tip number 8, walk to work. Before tackling the task that you've been putting off, go for a walk, get some exercise, get some fresh air and daylight, charge your batteries. Tip number 9, short sprints rather than long distance running. Time box your activity. If there's a huge task that is putting you off, then set yourself a fixed time and a short time to get started on it. Do a small amount in a fixed time and promise yourself a break at the end of it. And all the research seems to suggest that somewhere around 20 minutes is ideal. If you're feeling tired, if you're not feeling highly motivated, cut it down to 15 minutes. If you get to that 15 minutes and you've still got some energy, keep going for a little bit longer. Tip number 10. Celebrate each success. When you complete a task, then celebrate it. Mentally congratulate yourself. Give yourself a little break, a pat on the back. Acknowledge what you've done. All the research shows that people feel better at the end of a working day when they know they've achieved something. If you don't take time to acknowledge and celebrate your successes, then you can easily go home at the end of the day not feeling you've done very much. And tip number 11 takes it even further. Tip number 11 is to give yourself a reward. Reward yourself for doing things that are difficult, hard, complex, and unpleasant. If you're procrastinating about something, then promise yourself a reward for completing it. Call it a reward, call it an incentive, call it a bribe if you like. It works. There was a time when we realized that there was something dead in our drains and I needed to get it out. This would have meant putting on rubber gloves and reaching down into the drains, except that it was too deep. I knew that if I put on rubber gloves, they would fill up with dirty drain water. I would have to do it with my bare hands. The solution I chose was to combine a number of techniques. Firstly, I did the worst thing first. I did it first thing in the morning. I got up, got dressed in some old clothes, but didn't have a shower until after I'd done it. And secondly, I promised myself a reward, a particularly appealing breakfast, a bacon roll. I knew that if I could get this done first thing in the morning while I was fresh, I could then have a shower and give myself a reward. And that got it done. That's a great example of tip number 12. Choose your moment. If you're going to do something difficult, if you're going to do something unpleasant, there's a good chance there's a right time to do it. And the right time isn't, sometime in the future. It's at a specific date. If it's a specific date, you're transforming purposeless procrastination into purposive procrastination. Tip number 13, focus. Give all of your attention to the thing you need to get done. Clear your desk, turn off your computer, restart it, and only open the application you need to do the job. Make sure there are no distractions so that the only thing available for you to do is that one thing that you've been putting off. Tip number 14 is to create a commitment. Make a promise that you will get it done and advertise that promise. Don't just promise yourself, promise your family, promise your friends, promise your colleagues. Put it on a billboard. The more people who know about it, the more people you will be letting down by failing. The greater the loss of face. There are even apps available that will allow you to advertise to the wider community what you're planning to do. So use your friends, your family, your colleagues as a way of keeping you honest. Tip number 15, objective observer. One of the reasons we often fail to get things done and procrastinate and put them off is because we really don't know where to start or how to get things going. So ask an independent person, how would you get started? What would you do first? And if you don't have anyone who can ask, then ask yourself, how would an independent person do it? Pick someone who you know who will be good at it and ask yourself, how would they do it? That will give you the insight into what to do first, how to get started, and therefore how to create some momentum. And tip number 16 is to destroy the distractions. Whenever you feel yourself wandering towards a displacement activity, mentally recognize that's what's happening and deliberately stop. When you have no displacement activities left, there's only one thing to do. So promise yourself a reward and take a baby step and get started. Procrastination is a destroyer of personal productivity and effective working. But with these 16 tips, you can conquer procrastination, you can get stuff done, and you can become an expert at productivity. Please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. There's loads more great management courses content to come, so please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any of it. I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video, and in the meantime, keep learning.